Joined now by Joseph T. Burns, former legal counsel at the New York State Board of Elections. Great dear friend, and full disclosure, I love Joe for many reasons. Smart guy, brilliant guy, but he's also a fellow Syracuse Orangeman. Joe, thanks for joining us. Hello, buddy.
I'm good. Thanks for inviting me to do this. This is really cool. This is terrific.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I wanted to really talk to you, get down to the nitty gritty, because, and look, I'm not blowing smoke here just because we're friends and I've known you a long time, but like, you know, New York State election law like the back of your hand. And so I just want to pick your brain on the New York State Board of Elections in Albany, and there's some New York City Democrats who are trying to kick Donald Trump off the ballot. So before we get into like the legal nitty gritty, I just want to get, what was your first reaction when you heard that was the path to try to kick off Donald Trump here in the People's Republic of New York?
You know, part of me, knowing what's been going on around the country, and what some scholars on the left and even some who've been considered scholars on the right have been saying about this 14th Amendment issue, and you've seen different challenges filed in different states or different procedures in different states because every state has their own ballot access law. Part of me wasn't surprised. Part of me wasn't surprised that they were going to try the same thing here. And we know look, they had the Supreme Court oral argument on the Colorado appeal last week, I guess it was, and there's certainly all those issues that were hashed out there that have been hashed out on podcasts and in press, the 14th Amendment issues. But the thing that interests me quite a bit. But the thing that interests me is that there are also the state intricacies of a challenge like this. And New York's, as you know, New York as a former candidate and a former elected official, New York's election law is the word that the mainstream press frequently uses to describe it as Byzantine. I might quibble with that a little bit, but yeah, I'm meandering a bit, but I'm actually not surprised. Part of me thinks that they, if they had been more, part of me is a little surprised that they didn't, from my perspective, they didn't seem to have dotted all their I's or crossed all their T's, which I think opens the door to for someone like me to say, hey, point out that here are these deficiencies that you have with your family here in New York.
Yeah, well, let's drill down into that then. So, what exactly did the Democrats do here in New York when it comes to their formal complaint, their formal court case in New York State to try to knock Donald Trump off the ballot? What did they do?
Yeah, so let's start at the beginning. It's up to the State Board of Elections, specifically for the Republican presidential primary candidates, specifically the two Republican commissioners, not the Democratic commissioners. Usually, really every other vote that they take, certainly, of course, with ballot access, every other vote, it's a vote of all the commissioners, two Republicans and two Democrats. For ballot access for the Republican presidential primary, it's only the two Republican commissioners making the decision.
Now that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. That's there's nothing else in the election law. There's no other function of the commissioners where it's only the one party's commissioners, but to determine what Republican candidates belong on the presidential primary ballot. So to get on the ballot, there are three methods. One, you can file a petition. Nobody has tried to do that this year. Number two, you can claim that you qualify. You don't have to accept them, but you can claim that you qualify for federal matching funds. And number three, this is what all the candidates that made the ballot did, was claim that they were a, quote, nationally known, unquote, candidate for president. And it was up to the two Republican commissioners to make that determination as to who was nationally known, and if they were nationally known and they made the request in the proper form by sending a letter to the board making that request, then it was up to the commissioners to put them on the ballot. The board, this is a ministerial function. The board is a ministerial agency. They don't have the ability to go beyond the power that the statute has given them. And so when they were making their determination, the only thing they were looking at was, did Donald Trump properly and timely file his request, and was he nationally known? And it's beyond their scope to go and make judgments on all these other issues that have been raised. Now, the people that filed a lawsuit against President Trump had previously sent a letter to the board outlining their complaints or outlining their arguments as to why he is disqualified because of the 14th Amendment. That might be nice, it might be informative, but that's not the proper process that they should have followed, that they would have needed to have followed if they actually did want to have him removed from the ballot.
So it sounds like it's a very narrow scope, according to the law, that these two Republican commissioners have to follow. Is Donald Trump a national figure? Of course,
Right,
he is.
right.
So it sounds like that may have been the Democrats' really only legal recourse here then to say, no, he's not. I mean, at least that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, well, if they wanted to have raised these 14th Amendment arguments, the way, it wouldn't have been the board that would have been making that judgment, because they're only looking to see if Trump is a nationally known candidate. That's the only thing they're looking at. So if they wanted to raise these issues, it would have to be in court. But then you have to ask, well, how do you get to court? Who's entitled to get to court? Well, an objector, somebody who has duly filed objections with the board, would have standing to file a lawsuit. Doesn't mean you can win, but at least it would open the door for you. Well, simply sending a letter, articulating your complaints, articulating your arguments, that's not a proper objection under the election law. So, that's their first problem. So when after the board made their decision, then they go to court. Well, they couldn't go to court. They didn't go to court as proper objectors under the election law. The other problem is Trump filed his letter back in December.
And isn't that when the complaint should have come in?
In that, you're right. The shortest statutes of limitations in all of New York law are found in the election law, and the statute of limitations for something like this, challenging somebody's ability to be on the ballot, it's not measured from when the board makes a decision. It's measured from the time that the document has filed. Most of the time, it's a designating petition, but it might also be a certificate. In this case, it was the letter making the request. Well, that's when the clock starts running. So the clock started running back in December 2023. They went and filed this lawsuit last week, February 2024. Well, how long is the statute of limitations that they were operating under? 10 days. 10 days from the filing. So they're long past the date that they would have needed to get into court.
So there is a really tight window then, Joe, correct? I mean, literally
right.
a week and a half from when Donald Trump put in that paperwork. So they're not having a legal leg to stand on because he is clearly a national figure. And also the fact that they are now past the 10-day mark, correct?
Right, and they not being objectors, not having properly filed objections, they don't even have standing to be in court. So, right, those are pretty significant. Those are pretty significant procedural problems that they're going to have. That's before you even get to any of the 14th Amendment arguments that were argued a week ago at the Supreme Court. And I think most observers, most pundits are assuming that it's probably going to be 7, 8, maybe even 9 votes to keep Trump on the ballot.
But let's just say, you take the 14th Amendment argument that Donald Trump engaged in an insurrection. I think that's garbage. I think it's baloney on January 6th. So therefore, he's not eligible. I mean, we both know that, that amendment goes back to the Civil War to block, basically Confederate officers and soldiers from holding federal office. But let's just say someone bought that garbage and that BS under the very strict New York State election law. That's still not something these commissioners can even think about or consider, correct?
Right. That's right. Right. That's not right. That's again, the board, whether it's the state board elections or local boards, are ministerial bodies, and they're not permitted to go beyond the that narrow scope that that the statute gives them.
So from a legal perspective, then why even, again, trying to pick their brains, like why even file this? Because from my perspective, it sounds like it's more of a public relations stunt than something that's like actually following the letter of Code of Election law.
Well, I think they figure, I think their assumption, much like when we're dealing with, say, fraud in a designating petition for a highway superintendent candidate or town clerk candidate, there are certain things that can only be fought over in court. So I think that they were assuming that, well, they went about this improperly. I think they're assuming that this issue, this 14th Amendment issue, if they had gotten over these other procedural hurdles, that they could have fought over it in court. But beyond that, there are other issues that are also hanging out there that are I guess more substantive in nature. The 14th Amendment, the Section 3 that everybody's been discussing now for months. It deals with someone's ability to hold office. It doesn't say anything about someone's ability to run for office or contest the office or appear on the ballot for an office. Only about holding office. In New York, with the New York Republican primary, while the names of Trump and Nikki Haley and the other contenders will be on the ballot, you're not actually voting for those individuals. You're not voting to nominate them like you'd be voting for a U.S. Senate candidate in a primary or a state Senate candidate in a primary. You're not even, and this was once upon a time this was not the case. You're not even voting for actual delegates who are pledged to that person. Once upon a time, you were in New York, where you actually had the delegate names on the ballot. You're no longer doing that. All you're doing is voting. When we vote on April 2nd, all we're doing is voting to bind the delegates who will be chosen at a different time, to bind the delegates to vote for that individual. Now, that seems to me very, very different than this 14th Amendment issue of an individual's ability to hold an office. So that's another problem hanging out there. If these plaintiffs can even get over the initial procedural issues.
It's like strike 97 against them to see.
Yeah, and it's a little bit like I guess the way I look at this Supreme Court case is there are any number of arguments that President Trump's attorneys are articulating, and the reality is they've only got to be right on one of them. And it seems like that's the way I look at it. The other side, representing Colorado and representing the Colorado voters, they need to run the table. They need to be right on everything. So I certainly I think his odds are quite good at the U.S. Supreme Court, and certainly if this gets fought out in New York's state courts too.
Obviously, you're a passionate attorney. You love election law. the few of you that do in New York State. But like, even just from a legal perspective, Joe, like, do you think just like what a sad state of our democracy is? Whereas a lot of individuals, and it doesn't have to be Donald Trump, Joe. Like, let's just say it was Republicans going after Democrat. Like, how sad is our state of affairs where hyper partisan lawyers and groups and a political party is actually going to court in multiple states and now, including New York, trying to pass legislation to block someone from the ballot? Is that not, from your perspective, like the most undemocratic thing you can do?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. That's a good question. I gotta say, and this is simply anecdotal. I talk to people who are Republicans who love President Trump. I talk to people who are Republicans who are so on President Trump. I talk to Democrats who don't like President Trump, who support President Biden. I talk to never Trump Republicans. I talk to a wide variety of people of all political persuasions and political stripes. And I got to say, by and large, they're all very uneasy with this effort to remove President Trump from the ballot. And these aren't necessarily people who are well versed in the subject matter, who are well versed in constitutional law, who are well versed in election law. These are just regular Republicans and Democrats from across the political spectrum. But I got to say, for the most part, regardless of what they think of President Trump, they all seem to be pretty uneasy about this effort that you shouldn't you win an election at the ballot box, not in the courtroom. That it really makes them uneasy. And honestly, look at that. The Colorado Supreme Court did go 4-3 to remove Trump from the ballot, but all 7 of those Supreme Court justices are Democrats. So you had 3 of them saying Trump should stay on the ballot. You've had, I think I consider them people of the left. Robert Kennedy Jr., Cornel West, 2 would-be opponents of President Trump, coming out publicly saying he shouldn't be removed from the ballot. There's something that I think makes people a bit uneasy that you would have. I mean, honestly, if you believe any current polls, the leading candidate for president, that you wouldn't beat him in an election, that you would remove him from the ballot, make him ineligible to run. That leaves a lot of people uneasy, and I can see why.
Well, it's not just that, too. I mean, look, you mentioned Colorado. That went before a court. But let's talk the state of Maine. Their
Yeah,
Secretary of State, the person that made that decision, is not elected. She's a Democrat
right.
who was basically appointed by, their
The
legislature.
legislature, right,
So
right,
one
right,
person, one woman who
right,
ran for the United States Senate, considers herself a Bernie Sanders Democrat, one person in the state of Maine arbitrarily decided Trump was guilty of this and therefore he's not going to be on the ballot. So, like,
right.
take that, take New York, take all of these other efforts. I mean, from a legal perspective, Joe, like putting, still keeping your legal cap on, like, how does this play out and how big is the Supreme Court ruling going to be with this?
Well, and from what I gather, I think that was one of the issues that a couple of the justices focused on at the oral argument last week. That what are we going to do? Have this? I think their concern was, are we going to have this patchwork where Trump will be on the ballot in a few states and not be on the ballot in some other states, and in some places you're going to have a Supreme Court taking him off the ballot. In other places you're going to have a Secretary of State taking him off the ballot. And I think they were thinking that, well, wait a second, this is the 14th Amendment passed after the Civil War. The whole idea uh, of the 14th Amendment was that the state governments had done some pretty horrible things, and we're not going to let them do that any longer. So it's hard it's hard it's hard to say that the 14th Amendment. I think this is what the justices were thinking. It's hard to say that the 14th Amendment wanted wanted to empower states to undertake more of these experiments, and certainly with the political process, that probably wasn't the intention. It definitely wasn't the intention of the folks who authored that amendment.
And then to close out, let's just close out and wrap up with again our home state, state of New York. You're fairly confident based on the law, based on the numerous legal problems the Democrats have. Like you're confident President Trump will be on the New York Republican primary ballot and then be on the ballot in November.
Yeah, no, number one, it seems that I from what I heard and from what I with the oral arguments, the audio, and from what seems like pretty much every legal pundit out there is saying that this U.S. Supreme Court decision is going to be, 8-1, maybe even 9-0 in favor of keeping Trump on the ballot. So that I think that will essentially take the legs out of this New York case, and probably everywhere else. I think this issue um, will die off pretty quickly. And like I said with you, the New York case I think has a number of other pretty serious problems. Anyway,
It's
so
just like,
yeah,
but isn't it?
I would bet
But isn't
that
it?
when you go into the privacy booth on April 2nd, you look at your ballot, you're going to see President Trump's name on it. I would bet money on that.
But Joe, isn't it nutty that we're even having the discussion? Because again, I think rational guys like us, and we are rational guys for the most part. I think rational guys like us, we'd be just as upset or angry, someone who wants to protect democracy, the law, the Constitution, if Republicans are trying to pull the same shenanigans on a Democrat and using all these crazy legal arguments just to basically take out a political opponent. I mean, isn't it nuts we're even just having the discussion?
Well, that's a good question, and I'll answer that by saying stay tuned, because we have independent candidates: Robert Kennedy Jr., Cordell West, and Green Party candidate Jill Stein. I think the conventional wisdom is that all three of them will take more votes in a general election ballot from President Biden than from President Trump. I think that's the conventional wisdom. Again, there are 50 states, 50 different ballot access processes. So if you think this fight over President Trump appearing on the ballot has been something, then stay tuned, because I have a hunch that you're going to see efforts to keep these candidates off the ballot. So, um, it so if you're someone like me that's in this world, that's in this field, there's going to be plenty to talk about over the next few months.
Well, and I'll close by throwing out, like, in pardon the pun, throwing out a trump card. If you think they're throwing up legal challenges now to stop Donald Trump from getting off the ballot, just imagine what our friends on the other side of the aisle are going to do when he wins to prevent him from taking office. Like, this is
it
child's play right now.
Well, that's interesting. Because I mentioned the issue of uh, 14th Amendment, Section 3, someone's ability to um, run for office versus someone's ability to hold the office. And I'll be really interested to see how this Supreme Court decision comes out, and if it resolves the issue that Trump can run for office, can appear on the ballot, but he's also eligible to hold the office. Do they reach both of those conclusions, or do they simply say, yes, he's able to appear on the ballot, yes, he's able to run for office, but not reach the other question? I doubt that they want to leave that hanging out there, but who knows? It'll be fun to watch.
Oh, I don't think they're going to stop at anything to stop Donald Trump from taking office. But that, you know what, that can be the topic of our next
That'll be
podcast.
that'll be a conversation for November or December.
Exactly. All right. It's Joseph T. Burns, Esquire, lawyer extraordinaire, Syracuse Orangeman fan, and actually you penned a few editorials for Fox News as well, correct?
I did submit. I did a couple interviews for Fox. So I did have a couple op-eds appear in the Buffalo News, Post Standard, Daily News. I guess people like to hear what I have to say every now and again.
You're getting big time, Joe. You need an agent pretty
Something like that. Something like that.
All right, buddy. As
I wish I
always,
had your voice. I wish I had your voice and hair.
my face for radio. That's right. It's actually chia pet. I went bald a long time ago. I just threw it on my noggin. So, all right, buddy. Well, listen, it's Joe Burns, attorney, election law expert. Thanks so much for joining us. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.